So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm very excited to be presenting my job market paper that is titled Endogenous Institution, a Network Experiment in Nepal. This is co-authored with my with a fellow PhD student, Giulio Iacobelli, who's also from PSC, and he's also present in the seminar today. So if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to write it on the chat, and he'll be able to answer your questions real time. Okay, so let me move on to the introduction and what sort of motivated us to start this project. So often in the absence of a formal institution in a developing country setting, it is the local communities who are responsible for community-based projects. They are responsible to handle funds for, say, forest user groups, poverty funds, so small-scale projects. And so given the importance of such organizations, and increasingly governments have been spending more and more money on these, it becomes important to understand what works well for these groups and what does not. And often a natural way of monitoring these activities is to use peer monitoring, which is simply somebody from the village itself observing the actions of people in the village. And so this sort of helps reinforce cooperation. And peer monitoring in particular is effective, firstly, because the monitor might have a chance to punish the other people who go away from what is taken as a cooperative behavior. And the second channel, which is more interesting to us, is a reputation concern, where the person who's observing this action, the peer monitor per se, does not have an opportunity to punish, but he or she has the information about how you're behaving. And so the fact that she has this information can be used in the future to sort of spread message about your social image, or to will sort of come back to you later on. So in this paper, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a field experiment in Nepal, and we're going to understand mechanism, the demand for such a mechanism, peer monitoring, in particular, keeping in mind the reputation concerns. So why are reputation concerns important? So like I mentioned before, these are fairly small villages. So when I say small, around, think around 70 households, where almost everybody seems to know the other person. And so people really need to rely on such local connections for, let's say, risk sharing behavior, for public good provision, and even for information delivery. So it becomes important to know who is connected to who, and who's friends with who. And this is nothing but the study of social network, and hence it becomes important to understand the underlying structure of the network in the village. And so there are a couple of papers that look at how my position in the network affects how I behave, whether it be in terms of trust. I trust people who are closer to me, and I cooperate better with them, and hence it's easier to enforce contracts, even without anything formally signed. But what is also interesting is how do people who are not very close behave then? So in that direction, there's this paper by Chandrasekhar and Birza that look at improving cooperation for people who are far away in the network. So when I say far away, it's typically somebody who you do not know very well. And so you can improve their level of cooperation by exogenously assigning a monitor who is central to the network. So central, in simpler terms, basically means somebody who is influential in the network. So cooperation can be improved via this. So what we do is we sort of move one step forward from this and say, okay, so let us now allow people to choose their own monitoring institution instead of exogenously assigning one, and then see what happens in terms of behavior. So in this paper, we are going to be looking at how do individuals choose monitoring options as a function of their group composition. Secondly, given that they are given this opportunity to choose their own monitor, how does then that affect their level of cooperation? And to sort of sum it all up, how does this behavior of both cooperation and voting differs across different group compositions? So in order to answer these research questions, we start off with a network survey. So this is a very unique setting. We're going to rural villages in Nepal, in particular to capture these mechanisms that I just mentioned before, trust, social image, and so on. So in order to do that, we start with a network survey covering around 19 villages in Nepal with 2,000 women. The reason we focus only on women is because of the high migration rate of men in the village. So on the basis of the social network, we do two things. So we are able to tease out who is central in the network, central in the sense, again, influential. So who is more influential in the village. So, and to those influential people, we assign them possible monitor roles. And second, we are able to see who's close to whom. So who is X close to? Does X is close to Y and Z or A or B? So we are then able to, for each person X, assign them into a dense group, closely knit group, and a sparse group, a group with socially distant individuals. And so on the basis of the social network, we're going to be doing a lab in the field experiment, which is going to be a simple contribution game that people are going to be playing in groups of 3, where they can opt to vote for a monitor in order to oversee the game. So before I present you the experimental design, let me just situate our paper in terms of how we contribute. So it's a multi-field paper where we take inspirations from several parts of the literature, but the main contribution that we do is sort of to the literature on endogenous institution and monitoring, and how community-based institutions can be improved with the help of allowing people to choose their own monitors. So there are a couple of papers that look at that in the field, but we in the lab, sorry. And what we do is we take this to the field and sort of see how that changes, and in particular we see how it varies across dense groups and across sparse groups. And so the second literature that we're going to be looking at, of course, given that we're going to be mapping the social network and using this to sort of see who is close to whom, we are also going to contribute to this existing literature on field experiments in the network, particularly to papers that look at effect of the monitor. So we are going to be asking how does the demand for such monitors vary? And finally, we're also going to be looking at the literature on social image, other regarding preferences, which is the mechanism that we are relying on. So we do draw inspiration from the papers that look at reputation as a form of cooperation. And so we sort of show that in the field, that give in this unique setting, it works to have social image as a concern in order to reinforce cooperation. So given that, I'm going to move on to the experimental design. So before I give you details on that, I want to clarify as to how we use the network. So the network survey was simple. We asked questions along different dimensions. Who are your friends? Who do you borrow money from? And then we draw what we call a network map. So as you can see in this figure, each circle here is a woman, and a link established if either of them takes the name of the other person as a friend. And so the person circled in blue is somebody who is typically not influential in the village, and the red one is somebody who's central in the village. So we assign these two women as possible monitor options in all the 19 villages, so 2 monitors for each village. And then with the remaining of the women, we assign each woman, so in this case, the woman circled in green, to a dense group, which is circled in red, and then to a sparse group, which is circled in blue. So in order to form this group, there are many ways in which you can be close. So for the person in green, we could have assigned her this group or this group or this line and so on. So we randomly assign one possible dense group to this person, and similarly for the sparse. So this is how we form group composition. And so given we have all this in place, we invite these women over phone in order to take part in the experiment. So to give you a brief overview, I'm going to go in details on each component. So what happens is each woman is going to be interacting once in a dense group, once in a sparse group. So let's assume that to start with, she's now interacting with a dense group. So this is followed by a voting option. So the women see each other, they see who they're playing with, and then they decide either they want to vote for a monitor or not. And if they want to vote for the monitor, do they opt for somebody who is highly central or somebody who is not very central? Following this, we then randomize the order of how you play with the monitor. Do you first play with the monitor of the group's choice, or do you play monitor with a randomly assigned monitor? So the randomly assigned monitor is also going to be coming from these 3 options. And then this is, of course, followed by 1 round of contribution game with the monitor of your choice, and then 1 round of contribution game from the monitor of our choice. And then again, this repeats all over again in the socially sparse group for the second time. And so we randomize the order. So just to summarize the design, each woman is going to be playing a total of 4 rounds: endogenous dense, endogenous sparse, and then exogenous dense and exogenous sparse. Okay, so assuming that this overview is clear, let me now go on to each of the components in greater detail. So starting with the contribution game. So the contribution game is pretty fairly standard. It's a public good game. We give each of these women 10 tokens of different colors, and we tell them, you can contribute to this public pot where the value is going to be increased by 50% and then equally distributed irrespective of initial contribution. So we really emphasize this irrespective of initial contribution to these women. So given that you will be playing this contribution game, we then tell them, okay, so you will be playing this contribution game with this group of people because they can see each other. Do you then feel the need to elect a monitor? So they are given 3 options. No, I don't want to choose a monitor. Yes, I want to choose a monitor, and then choose either you want somebody who's central or somebody who's not very central in the village. And they vote via a piece of paper. So voting is private with no communication between group members. And once everybody has voted, we use a simple majority rule to decide who is going to be elected as the monitor. And so the role of the monitor in this game is to simply observe how much each person has been contributing, which is differentiated by the color of the token. So if a monitor is chosen, she comes into the room and observes contribution of each person, which would otherwise be private information. And we hypothesize that this demand for monitor is going to be very different across groups that know each other very well and groups that do not know each other very well, given that in closed groups you already have ex ante a high level of trust, altruism, because you interact on a daily basis and so on. So this is the effect that we're after. And this effect is primarily in our experiment driven by reputation concerns, given that there is no punishment power that the monitor has in the game. So given the experimental design, I move on to the results. So the first set of results are going to look at choice of the monitor, followed by contribution in the game. So like we hypothesized, very much in line with what we expected, the blue bar is what sparse groups do and the orange bar is what dense groups do. So if you look at the blue bar here, sparse groups tend to vote more often for a high central monitor compared to dense groups. So they prefer to be monitored. And we also show this with the multi-logit fixed effect regressions that sparse groups are 43% points more likely to elect a central monitor compared to dense groups. So this is for voting. So moving away from voting to contribution. So this is the clean case where we exogenously assign monitors. So looking at the clean case, we sort of reiterate the findings of Breza et al. To say that if you move away from dense to sparse groups and you give them a high central monitor, exogenously contribution goes up. So if you look at this column to this column, contribution goes up by 15%. Whereas in dense groups, there is not much effect of having a monitor at all. And so the more interesting question and sort of the main contribution of our paper is to say, what if you compare contribution in exogenous and endogenous cases? And so in order to do that, the blue bars are going to look at exogenous cases and the red bars are going to look at endogenous rounds. And so I'm going to compare contribution in these 2 rounds. Just to have a clean comparison, to make sure that we're comparing the right thing, we take a subsample of the total population and we restrict our sample to people who are interacting in the same group. So you're in the same group with the same monitor. And so the only thing that is different is, are you interacting with the same monitor given to you by a random experimenter, or is this person chosen by the group? So we fix that and then we sort of do this comparison. So to give you an example, if you look at the first graph here, consider people who have voted for no monitor endogenously. So we restrict our sample to everybody who's voted endogenously no monitor, and then we further restrict it to people who have voted, who've also played with no monitor exogenously. And so comparing their contributions, you see here that there is a significant impact of having chosen your own monitor, even though the monitor is no monitoring. So even though the institution that you've chosen is no monitoring, contribution goes up significantly, 21% of the mean in sparse groups, whereas for dense group, there is not much of an effect. So this is for when the group has chosen no monitor. But now if you compare the other subset, which is people who have voted for a high central monitor, does the result still hold? So we see here that for sparse groups, the result still holds when contribution increases if you have voted for the monitor yourself, if the group has voted for the monitor yourself. And we sort of claim this to be an endogeneity premium, that having chosen your own monitor helps improve the level of cooperation. And we're going to sort of see this also through our regression. So this is just to mirror what I've shown you in the graph. And you see here that in the sparse groups, contribution increases in the presence of a monitor chosen by the group. So if the group has chosen no monitor, it increases even more, almost around 1 token, whereas for sparse groups who have elected a monitor, high central, it increases around half a token. So another way to look at these results is to say, okay, so let's look at what happens in terms of the order, because the monitor who's elected is revealed only when people play the endogenous round. So does it matter if I play endogenous first, followed by the exogenous one, or the other way around? So in these graphs, I'm going to be showing you the blue line when you play exogenous first, and the red bar is going to show you playing endogenous first. So given that the group has chosen a no monitor and I played endogenous first, contribution increases in the sparse groups and also in the dense groups. So this is some sort of a signaling effect that is happening, that what we call a positive order effect, that given that you vote for the monitor and given that you see that this voting has occurred and your group ended up not choosing a monitor, contribution goes up in both rounds, in both endogenous and exogenous rounds. And similarly, if you look at the case where a high central monitor is elected by the group, there's not much happening in the sparse group that is statistically significant. But what is interesting here is to look at the dense groups. You see here that the bars flipped. So I mean, it looks a little like the U.S. elections, but this is I'm talking about endogenous and exogenous, where the bars are flipping. Where given that I see that the group voted for a high central monitor, I decrease my level of cooperation in the dense groups, because our hypothesis is because dense groups have a higher level of trust and higher prior as to what the monitor outcome should be. They end up reducing cooperation if they see that the group has elected a high central monitor, in the spirit that, oh, I think that we were close friends, but you still feel the need to elect a high central monitor. And we again reiterate this with the help of this regression here, where most of the impact of signaling, so the signaling impact is really concentrated in the dense groups. And so just to conclude quickly.
You're at the 1 minute mark.
Yeah, so just to conclude quickly, just summarizing what I've said before, sparse groups choose to be monitored. Given a choice to elect your own monitoring institution improves cooperation, but limited to groups that are far away from each other. And disclosing the choice of the group has some additional signal that's about expected level of cooperation, more so in dense groups. And this has implications for community-based organizations in the developing world. And we also have several follow-ups that are coming up. Thank you so much. And I hope you made use of the chat with the discussions there. And if you have any further comments, please feel free to email me on the address, or even just stick around to have a discussion at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much. And I thank Alessandra for having taken the time to read our paper and to discuss it. Thank you.